Hello and welcome to the first National African American Child and Family Research Center Conference. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm honored to serve as the director of the center, and although we have only been in place for 6 months, I thought it was important to introduce ourselves as a partner and a resource for practice, research, policy, and most importantly, to the African American community. The theme for this conference is the strengths and innovation of African American children and families. During our kickoff meeting with ACF, we asked the attendees, what excites you the most about the center? And consistently, we heard excitement about our strengths and assets-based perspective, and we also heard about the innovation, being able to do a new thing in this space. Now is a critical time to highlight and support the strengths and innovation of African American children and families, especially living through these past 2 years. It's also fitting for this conference to be held during the National Minority Health Month, which is a month that highlights efforts to improve the health of racial and ethnic populations nationwide. Our health as a community extends beyond our physical and our mental health, but includes economic opportunity, education, and our family supports or network. This conference offers an opportunity to learn about research efforts with the community to address these social determinants of health that contribute to the overall health of African American children and families. So again, I welcome you and I invite you to engage in the chat and stay present and engage with us for this very brief time that we have together today. Now I'd like to introduce and allow you to hear welcoming messages from our funder, the Administration for Children and Families Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, which will be represented by Dr. Amanda Coleman.
Thank you, Dr. Rollins. Greetings, everyone. On behalf of the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation within the Administration for Children and Families, also known as ACF, I am so excited to be here today and appreciative of the opportunity to welcome all of you to the first ever African American Child and Family Research Center National Conference. As Dr. Rollins said, my name is Amanda Coleman, and I, along with Megan Reed and Kalani Gray, work on the federal side as project officers for the center. And we are thrilled to be sharing this space with you today. So our office, the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, has a very long history of partnering with our colleagues in ACF program offices, such as the offices of Head Start, Childcare, Family Assistance, to sponsor research activities that we ultimately believe will help ACF administer programs and services in better ways, in ways that account for the unique needs, experiences, and strengths of the various populations we serve through programs such as TANF, childcare subsidies, and Head Start, among other programs. We are excited to further develop this line of work by funding the Morehouse School of Medicine under Dr. Rollins' leadership to bring and grow the African American Child and Family Research Center. We see the work that the center will accomplish over the next 5 years as greatly expanding our understanding of African American children and families and how best to serve them in ACF programs. We are thrilled to see the great, thoughtful, and innovative work that we know the center is going to produce. And I think some of that work is going to be shown through the conference today. The center has worked very hard to bring together an excellent group of experts and leaders in the research, policy, and practice spaces. And we really look forward to participating in the meeting today to learn more about the critical issues that are shaping the experiences of African American families, such as the impacts of systemic racism and employment patterns on access to childcare and early education. We also look forward to learning different models and approaches for using community-based participatory methods to explore topics related to TANF and how best to support fathers and Black families. Lastly, I would just like to thank the center staff who organized this meeting today, all of the presenters and attendees, and truly look forward to future opportunities to connect and continue these discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. Next, we will have Dr. Tabia Akintobi, who's chair of the Department of Community Health and Preventive Medicine at Morehouse School of Medicine. Dr. Akintobi.
Thank you so much. I am thrilled and excited to bring greetings from Morehouse School of Medicine, the Department of Community Health and Preventive Medicine, and the Prevention Research Center to say congratulations to Dr. Rollins and the team, and to thank all of you that have come from across the nation to experience the first National African American Child and Family Research Center Conference. This convening represents thought leaders in research, policy, and practice who have known about the importance of centering our efforts on the next generation of leaders, African American children and families. It's particularly important to us because we're very clear that the ACF and Morehouse School of Medicine have both been keenly interested and focused on addressing social determinants of health. So when we hear the terms research, policy, and practice, particularly when it has as its cross-cutting theme, the amplification of community voices and leaders to inform the issue, to advance the best ways that it should be, that those issues should be implemented, and advancing best practice, this is the conference that will advance those efforts. So when we think about economics, employment, and education, all of those factors are central to directly address when we think about advancing Morehouse School of Medicine's vision to lead the creation and advancement of health equity. And this conference and all of you represent important positions to doing that together. So I'm very excited about this meeting. I'm excited about the ways that it will advance those who are in practice, who are advocates, and in policy, to know that community-based participatory research is an approach and is also a way of being that will advance health equity for families across the United States and beyond, particularly African American families. So I'm excited about this meeting. Dr. Rollins, very proud of you, and really excited about all that the participants will bring to learn, live, and lead efforts to advance African American children and family research, practice, and beyond. All the best with this meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Akintobi. Dr. Rollins.
Thank you so much, Dr. Coleman and Dr. Akintobi. So now I would like to share a video with you about the National African American Child and Family Research Center. I thought a video would be more engaging than me going through PowerPoint slides, but this video will give you a better idea of our mission, vision, goals, and activities. And so please enjoy.
The National African American Child and Family Research Center is designed to provide national leadership and excellence in community-engaged research to better serve African American children and families. Funded by the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation within the Administration of Children and Families, and housed within the Prevention Research Center at Morehouse School of Medicine, the center is the first of its kind to focus exclusively on African American children and families. The majority of the research centered around African American families have been conducted using comparative research framework, where the behaviors, experiences, and outcomes of white families are viewed as the standard. This kind of framework ignores important historical and cultural context of African American life and inevitably places these families at a deficit in relation to white families. In addition, these studies have mostly been conducted by individuals outside of the African American community. The center seeks to change the cultural and institutional narratives about African American families by conducting research that takes into account our unique experiences, and the social inequalities we face. The goals of the center are to advance a community-engaged and higher caliber research program focused on African American children and families, build research capacity and infrastructure, to conduct research relevant to programs and policies under the administration of children and families, and effectively communicate research through a comprehensive dissemination strategy. Under goal number 1, the center will investigate the assets, needs, and experiences of African American families and children served by ACF programs. This includes temporary assistance for needy families, Head Start, and Childcare assistance programs. Special populations of interest include criminal justice-involved individuals, individuals with health and disability challenges, and African American residents of rural communities. The center's interdisciplinary team is diverse, inclusive, and culturally sensitive. As a part of the community-engaged agenda, the center is committed to collaborating with African American communities to develop and implement the research agenda. Under goal number 2, the center will develop and disseminate tools, resources, and approaches for the community, practitioners, researchers, policymakers, and government agencies based on the research priorities. In addition, the center will focus on developing and expanding the pool of researchers working with the African American community. We believe that training and funding researchers committed to understanding African American experiences within ACF programs will profoundly impact the nation's overall health. Specifically, the center will prioritize the development of researchers by offering the Emerging Scholars Program. The program is a 1-year-long research internship designed to increase knowledge and skills of undergraduate and graduate students interested in community-based participatory research around economic and social mobility, early childhood education, childcare, fatherhood, or social determinants of health for African American children and families. Eligible applicants will be undergraduate and graduate students in public health, social work, community development, public administration, and education programs. Scholars will receive training on research skills and receive mentoring and experience to launch their research careers. Under goal number 3, the center will implement a comprehensive dissemination strategy that communicates findings from research conducted within and outside of the center. The center will expand the reach of dissemination efforts and enhance research to practice translation through various mediums. To enhance community capacity to conduct research, the center has launched a community pilot grant program. The pilot grant program provides funding and technical assistance to community-based organizations interested in conducting research relevant to the well-being of African American families and children. Contact the African American Child and Family Research Center for more information and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, and all other social media outlets.
Okay, thank you again for that. And now we are going to turn to our first panel of the conference. The panel will be moderated by Dr. Alex Carmendale, who is one of our co-investigators who is leading our TANF and poverty alleviation portfolio. And now I would like to turn it over to Alex to moderate our discussion today.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for that, Dr. Rollins. My name is Dr. Alex Carmendale, and I'm excited to be joining the conference today. It really is an exciting, like I truly mean, it's an exciting moment to see this vision come to life and for all of you to be with us on this journey today. I serve as the co-investigator here at the National African American Child and Family Research Center, where I head up our work on economic mobility and poverty alleviation. As a center, we have talked a lot about, even in the video we just watched, community-based participatory research. We firmly believe that our work also can't live on the shelf, right? It needs to be applied. It needs to be responsive to the needs of community leaders and directly affected individuals and families. So that's why I'm thrilled to moderate today's first panel session on the current state and future of research, practice, and policy, directions to strengthen and support African-American children and families. And I get to do so with policy and practice experts that can help us understand how we can commit to that goal. So I'm thrilled to be moderating in this discussion with our distinguished guests, and I'll go ahead and introduce them. Welcome to Dr. Martha Okafor, the Senior Advisor at the Office of Early Childhood Development at the Administration for Children and Families. Patrick McFarland, Government Relations Manager at the Childcare Resources Center. Dr. William Jackson, the Chief Dreamer at the Village of Wisdom. And now I'm inspired to change my title to Chief Dreamer. That's really inspirational. So let me see, and Dr. Von Gay was supposed to be with us, but I believe he was not able to join us. So, but thank you all. We're gonna journey through a series of questions with our panelists to address the future of research and policy implications for African-American children and families. So we can jump right into it. Do we want to bring on our panelists? Let's see. So I'll ask the first question, and we can go in order here. The first question is a pretty big question. It asks, what are some of the most critical issues in the areas of economic mobility, early childhood education, childcare, and healthy relationships that should be addressed to strengthen Black families? And the second part of that is, what progress has been made and what support is needed? And we can actually start with Dr. Okafor.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and thank you so much for the opportunity to join this very important conference, as well as to be part of the panel to discuss this important issue. So your question on what is most critical issues around economic mobility and early childhood for Black families. So this is what I will say. And I'm also happy to be back with Morehouse School of Medicine. Used to be my home base. So glad you're doing great work. So to answer your question, families' economic mobility, as far as I'm concerned, and research has shown us, it depends on increasing income and financial capability of families or adults. And this is done through employment goals, education goals, or entrepreneurship goals. So thinking about these three goal areas that we know predict economic mobility, then we need to really work with our Black families in, first of all, goal setting, so that every family will have a process of setting their goals. And then all of us should be able to create meaningful opportunities for families to meet their economic goals, whether it is through education, trade, entrepreneurship, or through other employment. And then we have to, those in policy setting environment, also need to remove avoidable barriers and obstacles, structures that we Black families are going through that stands on their ways to meeting these goals. I also know that access to early and quality childhood education is one of the determinant factors that promote economic mobility of a future generation. As a result, we should look at Black children accessing quality early childhood development and education as a predictive factor for economic mobility of Black children futures. And as we think about the next generation, that we are mindful of the fact that this starts from preconception to conception until the child is in kindergarten. Because children's ability to develop well actually is a package of physical health, emotional health, and also spiritual health that are delivered through adults' relationship with the children. So this underscores why it is important for all of us, as we have these words that are thrown around, that we also focus on what matters most, and that is the relationship between adults and children to be healthy. So we are going upstream, and we are able to look at how to equip these adults that are parents and caregivers of children with the tools they need, the knowledge they need in order to develop this children's brain. Why is that important? Because children's brain is already developed 90% by the time they are age 5. So I want to focus on upstream measure, that if we want to accomplish what we are talking about, that we need to think about what matters and how do we begin to go upstream, both for the parents, but as well for our future generation. I'll pause.
Thank you so much, Dr. Okafor. And when you were talking about the upstream effects and kind of the predictive effects of interventions like that exist within early childhood education, I couldn't help but think about like the frameworks related to cradle to career, and what does it mean to implement a framework, a cradle to career framework specifically for Black communities, for Black families. Also the multi-generational or 2-generational approaches. A lot of folks are, stepping away from just 2-gen and thinking about 3-gen or just generally multi-generational approaches that may have so many positive upstream effects on Black children and families. Patrick, how about you?
So good morning. Still morning here in California. I'm honored to be here and in community with you all, and I'm excited for this conference and to learn so much. When I think of economic mobility, I think of affordability. We all know how important just our bottom line is to having healthy relationships and thriving families. But when I think about early childhood education and childcare and what it means for Black children and Black families, I really think about the child development and how important that is for our babies to learn and grow and develop, to be able to compete with their peers and to make it to the Supreme Court. I think that's in terms of early childhood education, that's the center of it, right? It's how our babies are developing. But in terms of economic mobility, I think something that we really need to focus on is the workforce compensation, wages, and benefits for early childhood professionals just don't meet the standard. And they cause sort of a cycle of poverty in Black communities that really we can trace it back to slavery. And I think that is something that we have to confront and we have to talk about and address consistently until that's resolved. In terms of progress that's been made on that front, I think we saw a lot of momentum in Congress around really big federal investment that would help state to deal with that issue, and that's something that I think we really need to focus on.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm thinking about the relationship between working conditions for early childhood educators, staff within childcare facilities, providers, who are disproportionately Black women themselves, who, all of these conditions affect the quality of learning environments, like learning and nurturing environments for early childhood as well. So thank you for raising that. Dr. Jackson, how about you?
Yeah, appreciate y'all for having me. Excited to be in this conversation. When I think about some of the issues here, I think about the fact that a lot of the folks that are making decisions about how Black families access childcare, about how families access employment, or even kind of increased earning potential, a lot of those programs are ran by folks that don't look like us, who are deeply unaware of what it means to provide those services in ways that are culturally responsive and culturally affirming, who are deeply unaware of the dreams of Black families and Black parents, and even Black children. And so I think with a lot of the funding that's coming down through the different initiatives that folks have already mentioned, in addition to the American Recovery Plan Act dollars, we have to think about how do we put those who are most directly impacted in decision-making positions to make decisions on their own behalf, right? The more that folks like even me and y'all, I'm assuming, are kind of the ones who are ultimately making decisions, really is putting space between that decision and the people who probably understand it the best. So a lot of our work at Village of Wisdom is really about doing what you all just kind of said in the opening video, is how do we put Black parents in decision-making positions, specifically as researchers, and then as consultants and advisors to these decisions that are being made. So to be specific, like here in Durham, there's an early childhood like education plan, right? And so if there isn't Black parents who are intimately involved in that early childhood plan, they're going to be scoping out what happens for the next 5 to 10 years. And so if we're making that type of plan void of any Black parents or any Black families, and we're not actually asking them about their dreams, about the things that they would need to feel like they need to thrive, then I think we're missing an opportunity. And most of the times when we talk about this kind of research to practice or making these types of policy decisions, we do it based off of needs assessments. And I'm just not really like a big fan of that, because I don't think that really speaks to what folks want, right? It talks about maybe the bare minimum that they need in a white supremacist society. And I'm a little over that. I think we really need to be looking at what do parents feel like they deserve in a liberated society, and what those dreams for their children look like for healthy development.
Yes, that's really powerful. And I think a huge value proposition for this center includes, respectfully engaging with directly affected folks, right? Like respectfully taking the time to learn and understand what people need, what Black families need, or what they want, or what they envision in terms of how their world should look in the future, right? Not just based off of numbers, statistics, sometimes some biased understanding of Black communities that's been developed through the lens of, as you mentioned, often like researchers that don't look like them. So appreciate you lifting that up. So that kind of is a good segue into this next question around racial equity. So racial equity is a very popular phrase. It's one that has gained a lot of traction in the last decade or so, and has been a core, I think, driver in terms of focusing on subgroups in child well-being and the social safety network and the world of early childhood education. And rightfully so, given that, children of color are disproportionately overrepresented in the younger population here. There's this notion of the country becoming browner, the browning of the US and things like that. So really curious to know from y'all's perspective, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, like, even within this administration, there's a racial equity executive order, right? Like, we have to really be thinking about how this applies to policy and practice. So it's really, really latching on to the way we should be thinking about our work. And I'd even add, and not to belabor this, because y'all are the panelists, y'all are the experts on this, but I'd even add there's something really unique about this from the context of like Black leaders, Black-led organizations doing racial equity work, and whether in their concerns and thoughts around like, are folks kind of masquerading around doing racial equity? Like, is it really happening, or are we just using terms to get the funding and to do the research project? So I digress. I'll pass it on to y'all, and either one of you can start on this. How have you advanced racial equity in your work to ensure Black children are set up for success in adulthood here? And either one of you can take it to start.
Okay, I guess I will start with the pause. So, so I think for me, I work with the federal government, part of Administration for Children and Family. And my job, I was blessed with an opportunity last year to serve as the executive director for the President's Task Force on COVID-19, Health Equity Task Force. So I'll say this, that last year, there were sets of recommendations that actually looked at lifting up the historical racism and structural barriers that actually created disparities that was worsened in the COVID-19, and not looking at that work as responding to COVID-19 alone and helping the nation to recover from it, but making sure that most of the policies that are being issued right now, and even last year, you will see that those policies and funding were actually addressing specific determinants that many people here have been working so hard to address. Now that I'm back to ACF in my regular job, because we finished that work, we are addressing the racial equity collectively, but I cannot tell you that there is this substantial outcome or change that we have reached, because we are beginning to work on it. Your statement is very valid. I think for all of us here, I believe in nothing about us without us. That if you want to address issues that people are experiencing, you have to engage people that are experiencing that challenge to inform the policy, the decision, the practice, because it's different when you're looking like away from the realities of what it means to wake up in a neighborhood and have gunshots and have all that you have to deal with, and then go back to sleep and still run around with your kids. I always, in our work, I think most of what will help us at the federal government that we're beginning to think about is, what are those standards and policies and laws that we are implementing right now, asking states and local government to implement? But those policies were developed to create a standard. Think about it. What is a standard? A standard is created from the premise of equality, to make everything equal. Equality is not equity. So when we create a lot of policies and that are creating standards, it could unintentionally create inequities, because those that have more will get more, and those that do not have, that were left behind, may not get enough of what they needed in order for them to even accomplish the same intended outcomes. So even though it was created from a good sense of a level playing field, Black families are not playing on a playing field that is level. So we're already coming behind And my role coming back to ACF, I've been trying to do under ECD is to ask those questions. ECD is early childhood development, is to ask those questions, right? That will say, okay, what is the premise of this policy? And is there inequity that is built into it, even if it's unintentional, so that we can begin to really address them? It's hard to do because that's what we've been doing and it's working. But the question is, it's working for who and who are left behind, and why is it not working for everyone? So I would like to hear what others have in mind, but my final words on this is that we all need to, wherever we are, establish 3 values to guide our operations. For me, the first one is that all children thrive, regardless of where they live, especially, at a time when brain science has shown us that they are capable of learning and growing and thriving. Also, the second one, all families thrive within their communities. And we have to look at what are those strengths. It's not easy for anyone to be in an environment where you are looked upon as being less than the others, or you have to do 300% to prove that you deserve what you know you can do. So all families thrive within their communities, in their workplace, wherever they are, if we give everyone opportunity and look into what strength they are bringing to the table and support them to actually flourish. The third one is all early childhood workers thrive, because by improving, like one of my panel members, co-panel members said, by improving the quality of the early childhood jobs, pay improves the care that we deliver to the kids and their interaction with the kids, the worker retention, as well as their economic mobility. I'll pause. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick, I think she was referencing you. You want to pick it up from here?
Sure, yeah, I would love to. So I want to give a little bit of context about Childcare Resource Center, where I work, before I jump in. So CCRC is a resource and referral agency in Southern California. We're the largest R&R in California. We're also a Head Start grantee. We serve about 40,000 children across 2 counties in Southern California. So really a big agency. And so in 2020, when everyone was sort of understanding racial equity a little bit more, we established an anti-racism task force within the agency, including employees from all of our sites, and meeting and just trying to figure out what we could do. And we started an employee resource group at CCRC for Black employees to meet, to get together, to discuss issues that we may be seeing sort of, in our own group. And that led to lifting up anti-racism agency-wide. It led to our agency hiring a director of DEI, which is really important. We've created some more Black History Month programming for the agency, and we've started an employee-led book club. So we're engaging employees, not just Black employees, but all employees around racial equity in a way that we didn't previously do before 2020. So I think that's great. And I wanted to share one outcome that I thought was really important with that. So one thing that as we started to do this, we noticed, it's particularly in Head Start, the teachers were much more aware of the different children in their class, and how just having representative books and toys in the classroom might impact their development and their experience. And so that became sort of a big thing for our employee resource group, to make sure that if we had extra toys and books at home, we could donate them, and making sure that these classrooms had what they needed. And I think the culmination of that was there were a group of families that were foster families that were not Black, and they had Black foster placements, and they were having some challenges with hair. And so a group of the Head Start teachers, and along with our employee resource group, we were able to donate some hair supplies. They were able to give a hair tutorial which I'm sure just has a tremendous impact on those kids to know that, there's a much bigger village that's looking out for them and caring for them. So I think in the world of ECU, we have a lot of big problems with funding and access to care and services, but this, that kind of, building an inclusive environment is the kind of thing that doesn't take big federal funding. And I think that's something really important to focus on. And then at the state level in California, we've done some amazing collaboration that I'm really proud of. I want to give a shout out to my colleague, Justin Blakely at Crystal Stairs. I see him here. So a group of us got together, we formed a group called Black Californians United for ECE. And at the start of the state budget season, we released a 10-point plan, which is obviously a nod to the Black Panther Party. And we held a briefing for legislative staff to let them know what we as a collective from various organizations and agencies across the state thought was an agenda for Black children and families in California. And that, there's been some interest with legislators. There's a bill that's coming up this year that we think aligns with one of our key priorities. And this group, the Black Californians United for ECE, we're working on starting a new NBCDI chapter in California to really sort of build on our advocacy. And so the bill that we really prioritized and that we've been working on, I want to highlight in California, it's AB 2806, and that bill would ban suspensions and expulsions in early care and education settings and provide resources for programs that may need to address challenging behaviors. So we're really excited about that. We think California should, have made that step a while ago, and so that's one, concrete outcome that we're hoping for in this year's legislative session.
Thank you for that. We love a call to action. So, Dr. Jackson, how about you?
Yeah, I just want to, congratulate Patrick on that work and appreciate y'all for doing that out in California. It's definitely super important. When I think about racial equity, I think about power. And when I think about power, I think about the ability to make decisions on your own behalf that necessarily determine what is happening inside of your life. And so I think the problem is that most of the times Black folks are pushing up against systems where they don't have access to the power to make the decisions that will lead to their best outcomes. And so I think we have to be really strategic about what it means to put parents, family members, and ourselves in positions to make those decisions, right? Because there's one thing where we advocate, right? But advocacy is asking of, and sometimes demanding of, folks to make a decision towards your benefit, right? As opposed to shifting that in a couple ways. One, trying to get to that position so that you can make that decision yourself, or two, informing the thinking of those people who are making the decision making. And that's why I think, this particular center is really important, right? Because of this goal that you all have around disseminating research and information, because a lot of times our policymakers are the people who are giving out grants in education and childcare. They're looking for evidence-based practices, right? So every year, millions, if not billions of dollars flow through philanthropy and our federal government based on evidence-based practices. And the thing you have to ask yourself the question about is who is coming up with these evidence-based practices, right? And that's what y'all talked about in the video. It ain't us, right? Usually it's not us, it's a whole bunch of white folks, right? And they don't really care about us, right? So then I think the question becomes, how do we create more criteria and more evidence-based practices that we know work well for our communities so that when folks are giving funding, they can fund work that comes from our cultural lens? Because the problem is that when you start talking about like a culturally responsive or a culturally affirming approach, there's not a lot of evidence for that because the people who are creating the evidence actually don't even know what it is. Like my man Patrick was talking simply about somebody trying to do a Black girl's hair, much less educating that Black girl inside of her own culturally responsive ways, right? And so this is the last thing I'll say about this whole racial equity piece is that, like, at Village of Wisdom, we were founded in 2014 by me and other Black folks And so like, our goal has never necessarily been racial equity. Like our goal has always been Black liberation. And so how do we create an entity where we are able to be so surrounded in our own Blackness that we can have the freedom to dream about what a culturally responsive space looks like without white gaze? Because as long as we're thinking about what it means to create a culturally affirming environment, a more racial equity environment under white gaze, we are diverting precious mental energy towards like the whiteness as opposed to like our own Black dreams. So we talk a lot about like, what does it mean to dream in Black? Like, what does it mean to dream about a liberatory environment? Because once we can picture that thing, then we can start to put the pieces in place to actually say that this is what this looks like. But it's really hard for our folks to operate even in that space, because so often in their work environments, in their school environments, and even sometimes in their home environments, they are forced to play by the rules of white supremacy as opposed to the own rules of their own culture. And so as long as we have to kind of continue to live with this double consciousness, I think we are under the threat of not being able to dream our biggest dreams. And so hopefully, I hope that that makes sense, because to me, racial equity would indicate, which is something that our parents talked about, the parents that we serve. We have this one project where we basically train parents in community-based participatory research. We call it community-driven research. And one of the things they talked about was like, you know, one, if I knew this was research, I would have been doing this a long time ago. And two, I didn't have to worry about whiteness in this space while I was learning about this thing that is kind of seen as rigorous, right? Like I was able to think, dream, and learn in Blackness. And so that opened up a whole new realm of possibilities in terms of like what I was actually asking for and what I wanted. And so I think we really have to think about, what does it mean to create these like oasis spaces where folks are able to think about Black liberation and then create criteria and evidence bases that can kind of control or at least direct people in that direction of like, this is the type of learning environment our children deserve. This is the type of working environment our people deserve, because right now we're being graded in a system that wasn't actually designed for us. And that has so many implications of like what we will be capable of. And even the broader society getting the fuller access to our genius, because for all of these years, we've been boxing with one arm behind our back, and we still been beating people down. So like, imagine what would be possible if we have both of our hands to kind of create the world that we need to see.
So you're not going to hear it, but you've got quite a few applauses coming through the chat and through the reaction emojis on the call. And I think what you just shared is extremely powerful. I think about, you know, I'm often asked like to define liberation and freedom, particularly in terms of work. Like, what does it mean to be liberated in the context of like employment in terms of work? And I often think about something you just really, I think, helped describe as well, like the ability to not have your time taken up by like capitalism, right? Like having to dictate your day to day, even the time that you can be a caregiver by the amount of hours you need to put towards like a work requirement to receive TANF, or even to meet work requirements for like childcare support and other things that are seemingly barriers, right, to being able to be free and think and care and love in your family. So I have a lot to reflect on in terms of that. You've given a lot of us to think about in terms of that, and appreciate that. I wanted to just jump in real quickly and say that we have a chat that is available for y'all to drop in questions. So if you have questions, I'll be taking questions. We have a couple more questions for our panelists that are already articulated here, but if you have any, please, comments, questions, be sure to drop them in the chat, and we'll be sure to address those when we shift in just a moment here. But the next question that I have is getting back to some of the policy, and Patrick, I'll actually pitch it to you since you started on this. What policies are being implemented at the local, state, and or federal levels that can help inform future research that we're working on or look to work on here at the National African American Child and Family Research Center?
Yeah, so I think, you know, on the policy front, I think provider compensation is the key to, you know, building, you know, a more sustainable field and expanding care, I think, especially in California, but across the country. So I think that's key. In terms of things that can be researched by the center, I'm very interested in the American Rescue Plan Act funding, because that was a huge amount of money, but it's short-term money. And I don't know exactly what all states are doing, but California has invested a lot of that money. And what they will do when that money is no longer coming from the federal government, I think, and how that plays out in the field will be very interesting to follow. California also made a tremendous investment in transitional kindergarten, and I think the center can definitely research TK, and California has a school district only approach, and what will the impact of that be on Black children in terms of discipline and learning? Will Black families choose TK over a community-based childcare program? And what impact will that have on existing childcare programs and childcare workers? So I think the TK thing is definitely something I would like to see the center research. And then I think at the local level, I know the city of Los Angeles used some of their COVID relief funds to build more childcare centers. And there are a lot of municipalities that are doing innovative things with their COVID money. Some have given stipends, some have waived fees, and just researching those, seeing which have been effective, which can continue beyond COVID. There's the COVID, the several waves of COVID funding, I think provide just a lot for the center to research in terms of childcare funding and what's been effective.
Thank you for that. Dr. Okafor.
Okay. So couple of things. One, I will encourage even Morehouse School of Medicine to look into the Smart and Secure Children. And this is really a parenting program that they once had. Just as William was talking about empowering us to be the best we can, this empowers parents with developmental, all these child development theories was broken down into what a parent can do daily in their daily routine and be supported to do that, so that children could be well developed in order for them to achieve that dream that William is saying, be more confident and secure in their moving through school, or whether they are using their gifted talents to do the work that they can do and own their own business. So we need to really think about how do we invest on parents, on everyone, grandparents, whoever is the adult taking care of kids at the early stage, because it's not a rocket science. We can translate this into daily things that will enable every child to be that dreamer, not only a dreamer, but accomplish their dream and be at that Supreme Court. The second thing is that I'd like the UPK. We need universal pre-K and or affordable early childhood development and education. We should research into how do we strengthen home-based care, because we know that many children are being taken care of in informal childcare settings, maybe care provided by family members, aunt, uncle, neighbor, friends. How are we engaging to develop and strengthen these informal care setting or network so that they have the tools, the skill sets, and the mindsets in order for them to prepare our children to be productive adults? I will also add, I like the pay. I want you to know, Patrick, that ACF, we're already thinking about the pay parity. So hopefully we'll be able to actualize that because it's important. So that will help a lot. But I also want to call out something that nobody is talking about, and that is the impact of COVID-19 on our children. My question is, how are Black children doing? Those Black children that lost their parents, grandparents, or adult caregivers, we know that there is disproportionate mortality, death by Black families due to COVID. Is someone looking? Is someone searching for where the kids that lost all these caregivers, what are their vulnerability? What are the risks they're going through? And even those that their parents survived from COVID, many of them are suffering from long COVID. Could someone look into this and elevate this issue? Because it may be the silent killer and issue factor that will even mess up a lot of the efforts we are putting in queue and to do this work. And lastly is the social emotional well-being of our family and children. And I will tip this when I mention about really that we need to think about policies and laws that we implement. I will use an example because, no matter what we do, we're still functioning in this environment. And if you look at the quality rating system that we use to rate even early care setting, that quality rating system does not look at assets of minority as a quality indicator. So when we rate certain systems as being high quality and give them more resources, but the metrics, the algorithm, the criteria being used does not even reflect quality. For us, dual language becomes a weakness that has to be overcome instead of an asset for poor children, right? But dual language for rich and high-end people is looked upon as, wow, what an asset. And so we need to pause. I'm working in the system, so there's so much I could say and so much I cannot say. But we are still working and struggling within the system that need to be upended. And then there is the opportunity of empowering ourselves wherever we are and creating future generations, right? By doing the right things and making sure parents are supported to raise these kids, especially 0 to 5. Because at that age 5, 90% of the brain is already fully developed at age 5. We need to pause and think about that opportunity. And I will kick it over to William. And William, I will say to you, I love what you said, especially about the research. And I believe that those evidence-based practice that we have, Morehouse School of Medicine and others, that could wrap around locally generated promising practices that are working for people and find out how to turn them into evidence practice that could be tested and scaled, thereby having policy and money follow such work to develop our community and our families. Thank you.
Go ahead, Dr. Jackson.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short here because we don't play in a policy space as much. I think, one, I think you bring up a lot of great points, Dr. Okafor, around just like the death that has happened inside of the Black community and how that has impacted the health of Black students and children. And even if it's not a caregiver, it's an auntie or an uncle that you love deeply. It was a grandmama that was like holding the family together. It was, we are such a kind of village-minded type people. The loss of anybody can really mean a lot to a child. And so when we think about that, as well as kind of the reduced social activities that children are able to make, how are we really investing in mental health for Black families? Like, what does mental health support look like? And I think that's one, how are we infusing capital into creating more mental health providers, right? Because for most, I'm assuming a lot of y'all are aware, like as a Black person looking for a Black therapist, it's hard for me to find somebody. And I got like all kinds of privileges and degrees, and I know a lot of people and a lot of people know me, and it's still difficult for me to find a provider that I feel like has the cultural capital to deal with my issues, right? And so thinking about that, and just multiplying that, right? Every time you kind of think down like the privileged pieces that folks don't have access to, what are our policy decisions that we're making to invest in families to kind of make up for the cost of COVID? Like there's a mental health cost of COVID that we're asking Black families to pay without any money, like without supporting them to pay for that, right? And so like, what are the policy decisions that we're making to try to build that infrastructure out? Because we know that like our schools are under-equipped to actually do this. A lot of childcare services are under-equipped to do this. And so we're asking people who are already underpaid and underappreciated to take on a level of accountability and I guess resource for Black families that just isn't fair to them or us, which I think ends up creating this issue, which I will bring up around policy, which is like we end up fighting as Black folks with the providers, right? And please, y'all, like I'm not caping for them. Like I'm not trying to save like the disillusioned white teacher or childcare provider. What I am saying is that a lot of times we end up arguing with people who don't have power. And what I mean by that is that like, even here locally in our kind of Durham County, like recently folks were getting mad at the school board, the local school board and the superintendents because the bus routes were messed up because they had been underpaying the bus drivers. But part of the problem there is that like in our state, we have been like illegally underfunded inside of our school systems for the last almost 30 years. And so now you're mad at the bus driver because they didn't pick you up. But really the problem is that the legislatures at our local state legislators are the ones who are making decisions around budgets that are leading to the underfunding of these critical resources that our people need. So this is like where, you know, people always say like local politics matter. Like this is like a big issue. And so what are we doing? How are we trying to hold our policymakers accountable for making decisions that's going to lead to the investment into the mental health infrastructure for the Black community? Because like, we gotta imagine over the next 5 to 10 years, it's gonna be rough, right? Like people have just gone through hell over the last 2 years, right? And we can't just act like that didn't happen because like in our little middle class homes, like it didn't impact us that much. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, wow, that's real. So the mental health aspects, I think about, I was recently reading through some survey data of school children in the metro Atlanta area where I live, and just seeing the data disaggregated by race, the increase over the last couple of years of Black teens who have seriously considered harming themselves or committing suicide. Is just extremely alarming, given that even suicide, as we know, historically has been an extremely taboo thing within the Black community. It seems to be having a weird kind of outlier effect. And I think it's a lot driven a lot by COVID-19, not just COVID, but all of the other things happening in the world, like simply the lack of support. I'm like, where do I go to get help for this? It's not in the school. It may not be in the community provider, you know, the after school programs or the social club. Where do I go for this kind of support if it's not at home? So, and how do we build capacity like of parents, of families, of caregivers to be that support? How does policy address that? You know, that's a question that just came across my mind as you were talking. I also wanted to go back. I didn't want to jump over this, Dr. Okafor, this notion of quality in early childhood settings. And I just thinking about the home-based care. I'm personally affected by that. My aunt owns a home-based child care center in Alabama, and the quality system is not only like one that's geared towards kind of more white-centered indicators of quality, but also it's expensive to become quality rated, right? In home-based childcare providers, like they don't necessarily always have the capital to get to that level, and unfortunately get squeezed out of the childcare market, which has a disproportionate effect on Black kids who are, you know, in places like Georgia, 80% of those that receive like subsidies for childcare. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. I know it's very, among the early childhood folks on the call, I know that's an extremely controversial issue, you know, quality rated systems and how we think about that. But I think it's right, Dr. Okafor, that we kind of question, some of this stuff.
I think I want to say something because we're talking about, we're in a research center, right?
Mm-hmm.
That most of our Black kids are in home care setting. There's no question about it. So one is that, how do we conduct research to inform strengthening that home-based setting? One, two, supporting the people running the home-based setting, making sure the quality there is parallel, right? There is parity in terms of quality there, but not in a punitive way, but in a way that is actually empowering. Because if you look at even the quality rating and improvement system that we have, I'm part of the government, you pause and look at it from an equity lens. You wonder why a center, let's even take a center where there's more resources going. A center that is rated high should have disproportionate number of Black kids in that center, disciplined, expelled. What is the essence of the quality? If there is there are so many things we can even do in the system to correct the metrics being used and addressing the inequity built into it. Because those that develop those metrics, the rating, we're not looking at it from the lens of equity and from this diversified understanding. When does a child, a Black boy who is just active, get disciplined and expelled, but similar activity? Because we raise our boys, the kids differently, that cultural sensitivity. But the same kid who is not a Black could be playing in their own way that they were raised to play. And it is accepted. And it's not perceived as disruptive or perceived as an abnormality. So that tells me that the normations, the reference point of what is norm and the reference point of what is quality need to be looked upon. And a research institution, a center like this, can begin to look at it and begin to elevate things that we take for granted. A lot of policies you're all living had to be looked upon, but it's priority of what comes first and what do we need to do. Talk less of all the social, emotional, mental health and other issues we're thinking about. And you may have partnership with tribal communities because they are beginning to come together to do exactly what we are talking about here. And they're getting resources to support their efforts too.
Thank you, thank you. So there is some rich commentary in the chat. Be sure to, check that out if you get a chance. I'm really have been just poured, I feel like y'all have just been pouring into all of us this morning. I have a couple of questions that have come through the chat, and each of you can take it if you feel comfortable. But to start out, why are services and funding given to lower income families and not working class families that almost qualify but make too much money? So I think the person who asked the question is asking about kind of like the distinction between low income, like below the poverty line, and those who might make just a little bit more than that, but don't qualify for support here. What do you think are some of the reasons why that is, and from your own perspectives?
I mean, I'll try to keep this short. I mean, our system is designed to basically kill a middle class, right? Like our president for 4 years was Donald Trump, and his main goal was to try to make sure that the wealthiest of us got rich. And I think a lot of his, the byproduct of that was like reducing that. But this is something that's been going on for a long time. Like a lot of the conversations we're having now, like reflect back to conversations that were being had in the early 80s. Like Reagan and Clinton and all of these presidents were a part of policy decisions that were happening at national and local levels that basically stripped a lot of the social services and supports that were in place away from our country. And so the reason why it's like that is because it's designed like that. And there's not enough political pressure to change the system so that we can have like universal pre-K programs, so that we can have universal feeding programs, so that we can have universal programs. And because our country was built on this idea of rugged individualism, it's difficult, I think, to get moderates to wrap their mind around the idea that folks who are working class like deserve to be paid like certain wages, right? Like as long as you have folks like Amazon and Walmart and all this other stuff paying so close to minimum wage, and then being the main ones not advocating for social services for their own employers, like this is like the situation we're dealing with. I think, I'll just end it with saying like, this is what happens when you have greedy white people in power.
That's one way to leave it. Thank you for that. Patrick or Dr. Okafor, did you have, Patrick, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Dr. Jackson said it better than I could. There's just no public investment. And so in a scenario where there's not enough money to serve everyone, I think it makes sense to serve those who need it the most and those who are the most vulnerable, but we need, much more sustained public investment to serve everyone.
And I don't know if the person asking the question was also asking about what we call the cliff effect, which means that when people are receiving benefits, some assistance from government, let's say TANF, and they start working because they work required benefits. If they get promoted and make more money, so they become what they call working poor, but it push that making money just to get a promotion can push them off the cliff, which means they will lose their childcare that is subsidized. They will lose food assistance, they will lose even sometimes healthcare, depending, right, on how their Medicaid, the state Medicaid looks like, what the threshold is. That is a problem. And I would say that even we know that, because if the idea of supporting family is for them to really be out of benefit and have economic mobility and thrive, then we need to figure out what should we do, because this is an unintended consequence of the way I will call it the healthcare or the benefit, the Human Services Assistance, TANF 101, we need to go to TANF 102, right? Or 0.2 or 02, whatever we want to call it. But that becomes, how do we strengthen and support people so that they don't lose those benefits like the food, like childcare and transportation, so we can free people, don't hold people down in benefit. But by supporting them with all this, what I call enabling support services, we will enable people to really thrive, get that promotion, and be independent of government, and have their family with the father of the child, fathers, mothers, all together. So that should be what we should be looking towards as a policy direction that strengthens family and also remove these inequities that are really destroying Black family unity and empowerment.
Yeah, thank you. I really want to underscore this notion of rugged individualism that Dr. Jackson brought up. I can't help but think about the myths associated with a lot of the programs related to dependency and personal responsibility, right? Like these are bedrocks of our social safety net and are the reasons why there are these harsh cutoffs, right? Because the goal is to not provide assistance to everybody who needs it, but to get as many people off of it as possible. And I think the paradigm shift is necessary, and we need to continue confronting and really pushing against this notion of individualism and personal responsibility, because what it does is it ignores all the systemic issues that Black folks have been dealing with, for centuries at this point. So thank y'all so much for raising that. And I'd be remiss if I also didn't mention that there are a lot of really interesting efforts to address the benefits cliff, right? States have a lot of options to raise their benefit threshold so that more working class folks can be eligible for things like childcare subsidies, like different supports offered through TANF and through other programs as well. So I wish we had more time to dive into all of that, and I'm happy to talk with folks about that afterwards, but that's just an FYI. The next question I have here, and we are getting close to the end of our hour, which is terrible. Well, first, let me call attention to the chat. There's a really interesting discussion happening here about the seemingly absence of fathers in the early childhood space. And I know that is a huge focus for us here at the center. It's also going to be a part of the conversation we're having over the next 2 days during this conference. So please check out the agenda to find where that conversation is going to continue, but also check out that discussion in the chat here. It is truly something powerful. But last question that I have for the panelists: how do we empower families to take these positions of power to make decisions that impact their lives when they face barriers related to lack of time, possibly from working multiple jobs or atypical work schedules, or lack of resources like money for campaign fundraising, transportation to meetings, etc.?
Okay.
Jump in there.
I will start. I was waiting for Patrick or William to start. Do you guys want to start? I will yield. You guys could start and I could close. No? Okay. So how do we help families? So this is what I'll say. Families, a family is a bedrock of every child. Children don't fall on the tree. And children's ability to develop, to become like the Patrick we're seeing, the William we're seeing, Alex, all of us on this Hollywood square. We got there because we had a caring adult sometime in our life, especially for me, even early in my life. Secondly, we also had support, whether you call them mentors or coach, but we had people that could say to us, your situation now or your history, whatever is your history, does not define who you are now. There is power of now and there is power of the future. The more we begin, because there's a lot of pain and hurt and trauma, historical, not to talk about even a child coming into a school system. I've been in that space, and that child knows the teacher doesn't even like the child. The teacher doesn't like you because of the color of your skin, or you're picked upon, or you're picked at by your peers because of your kinky hair. And you're trying, that child's ability to thrive in that environment is a huge asset to begin with. So we have to begin to look at how do we support and create a network that says to each other, you know what, add a girl, add a boy, it may not be environment where you can thrive, but there is something in you that you can either influence in that environment or take somewhere else and look for where you can make impact. I think it's about time. And I will also add that even while we are doing this individually and collectively to support one another, wherever we are, always look for someone to develop, to mentor and coach, so that someone continues to grow and really move on that improvement of our collective good. And finally, we need to change the system as they are, because we don't live in a vacuum. The system that creates that condition or that could obstruct our ability to thrive, we need to intentionally look at changing them from an equity lens. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Okafor. Patrick or Dr. Jackson?
So the question is, what do we do to help families, right?
How can we help them? Yeah, how can we help them take on more positions of power, just basically engage in democracy? That's what I'll boil it down to, whether it's through in making decisions around, local school policy, safety net policy, having a little bit more say in how we started out this conversation, having a little bit more say in their material conditions, economically, socially, and others.
Definitely. I think for all of us in our various roles, I think it's elevating family engagement, hearing directly from people that are most impacted by policies and especially by failed policies, and being able to lift those up. I think that's critically important, so that informs policies. And then I think it's all of us collectively speaking up about, things that we experience, things that are important to us. A couple of things that, there's really harmful narratives about Black parents and Black families. I see some of it in the chat. But there's also, amazing stories of especially about Black dads. I'm a big sports fan. I think of, like Deion Sanders and what he's doing with his sons. That is an amazing story. We should be talking about that stuff. And I think when we look at Black communities across the United States and the experience, the collective experience that we all have with the oppression that we face from this country, I think reparations are essential to helping us overcome, the centuries of oppression. I think we all have a responsibility to talk about that whatever chance we get, and to keep elevating that and bring it, further into the public consciousness. It's made a lot of progress over the last few years, but we need to keep pushing that and keep banging that drum to get us, to be able to build, full thriving communities where we have, ownership and self-determination.
Well said. Dr. Jackson, you've got the last word for us on this.
Yeah, let me just double click on what Patrick just said. Run me our money, fam. Run us the money. We talk a lot about a lot of different things, but when you say well, what does it mean to support families in these particular areas and all this other stuff? We live in a capitalistic society. I don't love it, but capitalistic society means capital, right? And capital is what power is. And so run me our money, run everybody their money so we can actually do what we need to do. And I think this goes to this whole conversation that folks are also having in the chat around class. We are asking folks to do a couple of things that are really, really hard, which is one, talk to their Black babies about this racist ass country. I want you to help your child develop a positive racial identity while they are also viewing Black death on the TV every quarter, while they're also viewing negative stereotypes about their people every day, right? And then on top of that, I want you to try to make sense of your racist white job, control your emotions while you were there, not necessarily be paid the money that you need to be paid, and then have the emotional capacity to come home and then parent your children back on this whole racial identity journey. And then after all of that, you got to make good decisions about what you're doing in your life. You're supposed to build wealth. You're supposed to, eat healthy, take care of your family, take care of your mama and them and all this other stuff. This don't make sense, right? First of all, I think that's just the conversation we need to have with working class Black folks and folks who don't have as much access to these resources, because the shit is hard for me and I got a lot of privileges, right? So I think we just got to have a better conversation about that, especially middle-class Black folks, when we're having conversation with lower income Black folks, because for whatever reason, your life worked out for you to be sitting in this $250,000 home, that stuff, a lot of that stuff is by change. My one generation out of poverty, when I talk to my parents, the way that they got here was a blessing, right? Like a miracle, favor, right? Like not because, oh, they were so great. Like, yes, they were amazing parents, but also like some stuff just worked out well for them and they worked hard and they deserved it. And also there's a lot of different ways that stuff could have went left and I could have grew up in a completely different situation. So I think a lot of us have to kind of bring ourselves down and bring our humility down around like how we got in these situations and also our own kind of woke quotients. I say all of that to say, right, when we do our work at Village of Wisdom and we ask parents to engage with us as researchers or to engage with us in creating culturally competent like cultural events or engage with us to facilitate workshops, we pay them. Because the only people who can volunteer for that stuff are middle-class parents who are being paid to be away from work. That's what PTO is. But if you are an hourly worker, then you can't actually get paid to do this stuff, all of this engagement. So you were talking about people showing up to events and folks are like, well, why don't Black parents show up? Because our transportation infrastructure is messed up. Because it takes an hour and a half for them to get to their kids' school on public transportation and an hour and a half back. Who does that after 5 o'clock? That's 9 o'clock. Ain't nobody got time to do that. So what we say is like, okay, we're going to pay you to show up. We're going to give you childcare. We're going to give you a food stipend. So now you can fully engage on top of us trying to create a culturally competent environment for you to learn, grow, and think and dream in, and then giving you the power to say like, no, I want you to define our research outcomes. I'm not about to sit up here and write this. You're the one that just went through that particular experience. I want to hear your words because your words are going to get us a lot closer to freedom. I say all of that to say that I would love to invite all of y'all to our Wisdom Wednesdays. Wisdom Wednesdays is a space for Black parents and Black families and those folks who care about Black children to talk to each other about the Black Genius framework and really kind of continue to have this space to dream in Black. So I really, really appreciated like having this time with y'all today. I will just push everybody to remember like we all in this together. Like if you got a little social class, that's great. But your responsibility is to give away your social capital for the liberation of Black people. And again, white folks run us our money.
All right. Wow, like mic drop. First of all, thank you so much to the three of you for giving us all of this wisdom. I mean, I feel a little bit more liberated after just listening to this conversation today with you all. So thank you so much. We can't thank you enough for giving your time to this group today. I hope we can save the chat. There's been so much good fodder in the chat related to the issues we discussed today. I think I'm out of time. All of us are out of time and we have to move on to the rest of the conference. So invite you all to stick with us here and look forward to continuing these conversations later. And Dr. Rollins, am I passing it back over to you?
Sorry, I was just doing a little shout over here, but thank you all so much, the panelists. I knew this was going to be amazing and you all did not fail. This was powerful. So thank you so much for your time. I believe our conference planners are going to play a video for us now to give us instructions on how to get to our breakout sessions. So please stick with us and join one of the sessions that are happening in a few moments. Thank you so much. It's like people are starting to come in from their breakout rooms. With those of you that are here, please go to the chat and complete our evaluation for day one. Really want to understand what your thoughts and perspectives were for or are for this first day and this first time having this conference. So please click on that link in the chat and complete that survey for us. Back again. All right, well, thank you all again. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. Again, for our first day of the conference. Thank you so much to all of the presenters for your preparation and presentations. Thank you, moderators, for guiding those sessions and facilitating the sessions for us and questions and answers. Thank you for all of you again for just hanging with us. Now, tomorrow, we will have our Fatherhood Town Hall. You do not want to miss it. If you thought today's panel was something, please know tomorrow's panel will be on fire as well. So please make sure that you register and share. Let others know to please join us tomorrow, same time, same place, for the webinar on tomorrow, the Fatherhood Town Hall. Thank you all again so much for your time, and we'll see you all tomorrow.